Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Welcome to the World Water Week Communications Initiative. For those of you who did not join us last week, my name is Jörgel Espeland, and I am hosting this program. Our producer is Cecile Pilon-Hugh, and if you have any technical issues, you can always contact her with a direct chat in the chat box, or if you send her an email on her email address, and she will post that address in the chat box as well. World Water Week Communications Initiative has been developed together with the Grundfos Foundation, and this year we will focus on the theme of World Water Week, Seeing the Unseen, the Value of Water. We will also have a special focus on the three headings, the theme headings: the value of water for people and development, the financial and economic value of water, and value of water for nature and climate change. For those of you who so wishes, it's possible to get automatic transcript on Zoom. If you have any questions to the speaker, please write it down in the chat box, and we will then convey all the questions at the end of the presentations. All sessions are, as they've been last week as well, they are recorded, and I will send out the link to you either later today or tomorrow, so you will have them to rewatch, or for those of you who are not able to stay on for the full program, you will never miss anything. There will be links. And yeah, I think that's it from me. I will now introduce to you the first speaker of the day, Anjil Adhikari, thematic lead Wash and Water Governance from Oxfam in Nepal. Welcome very much to the program, Anjil.
Thank you.
Anjil is going to give us an insight on social, commercial, and technical aspects of pricing of water and the challenges and benefits with a market-based approach. So over to you, the floor is yours.
Thank you, everyone. Namaste. This is Anjil Adhikari from Oxfam Nepal. I've been with Oxfam for almost 7 years now, and today I'm here to talk about the issue on pricing of water, a very pressing issue that we must really start talking about. So I come from the country, like I said, there's abundant water resources and people have been getting it for free, but with time now they have water supply systems in their homes. These sources, but they used to fetch water, now they have the pipe system that's actually bringing water to their home. But with these changes in place, what they've really forgotten is, water may be free, but not the system that brings water to your home. And so to really understand how people perceive pricing of water, Oxfam recently conducted a very intensive study in over 528 water supply system to really understand different scenarios in water supply systems, including the tariff. We asked them one simple question: are you paying for your water supply system? And majority of them said yes. And then we also asked them another important question: so if you are paying for your water supply system, so do you have a tariff in place? That's when majority of these water supply schemes systems representative, they said they don't. So it was kind of confusing for us, because initially they were saying they're paying for the water supply system, but they are saying they don't have a tariff, they don't have a price for it. You can see each drop represents around 16 water supply system, and you can see majority of these schemes, they don't have tariff in place. So we try to dive deeper to understand why these schemes don't have tariff, but they're still saying they're paying for the water supply systems. So we saw that although they have tariff in place, sorry, they don't have tariff in place, what they do is when the system breaks down, they gather and they collect money. So it's like just reacting to the problem. So if a pump breaks down and it costs, let's say $500, they gather and they try to collect that money from everyone in the village. Sometimes it takes more than 20 days, and the system remains dysfunctional throughout the period of time. Then we try to see how does this actually impact the response time in terms of like quick fixes. We then try to look into like how does pricing of water then impact like their quick response to quick fixes. So we saw that the schemes who have tariff in place, they have at least some bank balance, so they can do some quick fixes if there is a need. But the schemes that don't have tariff in place, they don't have any balance, which is like no brainer, and as a result, if there is any sort of even minor breakdown, they end up being dysfunctional for quite a period of time. That's when we learned that debate now should not be about whether drinking water should be free, and we started talking about maybe it's important to go on talking about reasonable pricing of water. I would like to also show you some of the expenses that we have. Each of these names, there are the rural municipalities, and each rural municipalities, they have around 160 smaller water supply systems. So these are typical expenses that these water supply systems have, and on an average annually, each rural municipality are are paying around $53,626 worth of expenses. So that if they have to like pay all by themselves, let's by the government, this is the amount of money that each rural municipality should be bearing. And when we say about pricing of water, or water should be free, then a big question arises. If that's so, then who is going to bear all these expenses? And most of the time people do say, well, that's when the government has to step in, and that's when government has to pay for it. And we try to like stop for a few seconds and then say, okay, let's even look for that option. We try to go to the government and really see what is in their plate currently. We saw that just to fix existing schemes and extend the services to the areas where there are no water supply system, the Nepal government has to invest around 1,879 million USD in just these works, let alone getting into the operations and maintenance cost of the scheme, which are already in operation. I think these were very strong evidence for us to really lobby for scientific pricing of water. But then what is scientific pricing of water? Scientific pricing of water includes all the costs that's associated with to make water supply system run sustainably throughout the period of time. Although I have mentioned capex, operation expenses, maintenance expenses, capital maintenance expenses, replacement cost, and other sort of loans that are in the system, practically in rural water supply systems, we do not consider capex because it makes the tariff really expensive. So we only consider the other expenses to form a tariff. And when we talk about this scientific pricing, there is often this very common voice that says, well, if you go towards scientific pricing, the price could be really high and there could be irregularity. That's when we try to look, okay, so what's the typical pattern of tariff in our villages? We saw that in generic, $1 a month is very popular, and $2 a month is is less popular, and the rare tariffs were $3 a month or $4 a month. And we saw that in terms of irregularity, the price, the $1 a month were household with $1 a month were more irregular than the one with more tariff. uh, there are some limitations here because the sample size for the higher number of tariffs were really low compared to those with $1 tariff a month. But on the top of the surface, we were kind of clear that with if the need is real, if the scarcity is real, the rate may not be the bigger factor. But again, here we have not done co-comparison of economic status of the people paying in all these like different slots of tariff. So there are some limitations, but this was very clear for us that pricing should be scientific, not cheap. And if the price tends to be higher, that's when government should partially subsidize it. So this could be the scenario where government could step in, where maximum involvement will be done, payment will be done from the households, where government can chip in some percentage of the tariff. But having said all these things, we still have some problem. We still have some problem to roll out the tariff. We know tariff is important. We know tariff payment should be, like a practice. But like I said before, in Nepal, tariff culture is still a challenge. And it's because we grew in a country where you can see flowing water everywhere, here and there. And secondly, we all the water supply schemes, or most of the water supply schemes in the rural areas that we have built in last few years, last 10 to 12 years, they were of very poor quality. And that's why it's a bit difficult to go now and tell them to pay the tariff when the system frequently breaks down. And thirdly, the governance in terms of the user committee, it's not so transparent. As you can see, the typical NGO project is such that we go and construct a water supply system in an area, and we train few community members, we form a user committee, we expect them to manage the system, but they are not professionals. And at the end, they don't have proper accounting, they don't have proper meter reading, in place, they don't have proper cash flow transparency, and that kind of, like in long run, user lose interest, lose trust to pay the tariff. And although the digital platforms have kind of, like been popular in urban areas, we have found that the digital payment platform is a bit un I think it's still untouched in most of the rural areas. As a result, people still have to, like if they have to pay tariff, they have to walk 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and they are less reluctant to do so, to just a few dollars and walking 20-30 minutes. And interestingly, we also saw another interesting challenge. We try to look into the seasonal pattern, if the season is actually impacting the tariff collection. We saw that there was almost zero tariff collection across all 528 water supply systems during a monsoon season, because in hilly region, people have to walk a bit through a difficult terrain, and it's a bit hectic to walk through those areas, like collecting tariff door by door in monsoon season. That's when we saw the importance of bringing in the digital platform. So with all these problems in place, you might be wondering, okay, we know about these problems, what Oxfam is doing here? So what Oxfam is doing is, under the funding of Grundfos Foundation, Oxfam is currently working on a project, alternative management model. An alternative management model is a project where we are trying to bring an alternate solution to the existing community managed model. Uh, so, in Nepal, we have smaller water supply systems segregated or scattered in wider areas. For example, like I said, in one of the rural municipality, we have 160 water supply schemes. And this could be as small as 20 household managed 20 household schemes, and could be 100 household schemes. These 160 water supply systems, they have their own, like user committees, they have their own technicians if they need one, and it becomes a bit expensive for each of them to pay imagine a scheme of 20 households sustaining to keep a technician. It's going to be too expensive. So what we are trying to do here is we're trying to bundle all these schemes together. And the problem these schemes currently face are not just limited to these, like lack of fund or lack of expertise, but the serious problem is also on the transparency. And by bundling all these schemes together, we're trying to bring them under a board mechanism. And this board will do a lot of things, but I'll focus more on tariff here. And the board will be responsible in collecting tariff. So what really happens is, the board will be engaging with the with the different digital platform mechanism, and the user will now be then able to pay the tariff. So number one, now even during monsoon season, the user will be able to pay tariff through a digital platform, and they will be easily able to see what is the amount of money that they have been paying each month, where the money goes, and how the board is spending on it, because everything will be digitized. And then with this, the user will be able to see it, will have more transparent access to how the money is being spent. And we strongly believe with this, they're going to increase trust. And as they can see everything very clearly online, this is going to bring like increase the culture of tariff in place. We have just like few days ago signed an agreement with private sector, and they are going to provide all the services that I mentioned to you for 4 cent per household per month, which is really cheap. So with this 4 cent per household per month, these water supply systems will have access to digital platforms, all the possible available digital platform around Nepal. They will have access to that in their areas. And if there are people who cannot use digital platform through mobile phone, this private sector will set up an agent in the local shops where they can go and pay the tariff, and there can be, like there will be easy and the shop can pay on their behalf. Secondly, all the income and expenditures of the water supply systems are, like centrally recorded and centrally available, so that the one who is managing this can have easy access to really see, like how easily tariff is collected, and in terms of and where the government has to invest if there is, like not enough tariff collection, where the government has to kind of, like support if there is a frequent system breakdown. And we strongly believe the third one is going to be more important for them, because now the community will be able to log in their problems online. An online ticket will be issued, and the board has to kind of work on that, because we will be able to see when the problem was logged and how long it took to resolve it. So with this, we believe that the water supply system is going to be more transparent, the tariff payment will be more accessible, and we are going to build more trust of the community. And as we do so, we are bringing community, we are kind of influencing community to build on the culture of the tariff. And I think because of the earthquake that happened in Nepal a few years back, they have seen really clearly the need of like certain contingency fund in their place, just in case there is some breakdown. So we therefore are not talking about making water free. We are working very hard to make the best of what users are paying for, because we believe nothing in this world is free. The only question is who is paying for it. Thank you. I have two images here where we are kind of showing what this community's, like voices was about tariff. It's a bit long, but the message was that they have realized the need of tariff, and that needs to be, like covered. Otherwise, they're not going to have a sustainable access to water supply. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anjil. We have a question for you. You have been talking a little bit how private sector has been involved. It was a question from McNay when you were speaking about the responsibility of governments, asking how can we involve the private sector in this? Do you want to elaborate a bit further on that question?
Yes, definitely. So in terms of private sector, our initial plan was to engage them on like managing entire water supply system in rural areas. But since it was a bit risky, like because the roads are not accessible, it's a bit difficult to like mobilize all the technicians in the rural areas. Private sectors were a bit hesitant to like take over, like manage all the water supply systems. So what we have done as an entry point is we have brought them as a digital partner, where they will provide us all the access to like so private sector role here is number one. They are here to provide us access to all the digital platform, be like aware local communities on on how to use digital platform to pay tariff, where Oxfam will be investing on, like awareing community on how to use these digital platforms, where they will be bringing those services in the area. Number three, they will be providing the centralized financial accounting, asset management, and complaint feedback mechanism platforms for a very minimal price. And with this, now the board, which is currently established to manage these schemes, will take that service in place. Secondly, the private sector involvement gradually in next stage will be on, like the availability of technician. We wanted to start the involvement of technicians right away through the private sector, but it was a bit difficult because we do not have an estimate of how many many technicians would be required during monsoon season due to the breakdown, and because of the like very difficult terrain, they were a bit reluctant to really invest huge amount of money right away from the beginning. So currently, A, we have established with digital platform, but B, in long run, we are also bringing them as a technical partner in terms of mobilizing the plumbers and electrician and technicians. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have a question from Marmarissa. This is always a problem in rural areas. Great way to address it. Do we know something about urban and peri-urban on this tariff and paying issue? Have you got anything for us there, Anjil?
Yeah, yes. So in terms of urban area, tariff collection is not that much of a problem compared to urban areas, because like we have board, we have this like valley board, or a very professional service providers in the urban areas, and people already have this access to digital platforms to pay for it, and they have all of them have the metered system, so they know how much money should be paid, and if they don't pay it, like the money goes on like kind of adding up, and they also have to pay for the fine. So the tendency of paying tariff is satisfactory in urban areas. But again, if you go towards the border side of Nepal, between India and Nepal, the price, although it's semi-urban areas, the tariff payment is a bit like difficult there, not because like there is no access to service. It's because there is less awareness, and we need to invest more, because like we in last 5 to 10 years, there has been so many projects in terms of awareness and all those things. They have kind of lost the track of like bringing a business a part of the WAS movement. So in urban areas, mostly around capital cities and developed cities, there is no problem regarding tariff collection. People are doing it. In rural areas, there is a problem. In terms of semi-urban areas, mostly towards the border of Indian side, the tariff collection is still a challenge.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. McNair says, this is the same issue we encounter in Africa, risk versus return on low tariff for water to deliver and manage the water systems themselves. Digital side is easier with M-Pesa, which is a digital payment used in Kenya, or mobile payment system used in Kenya. And it's very well established in Africa. But appreciate your thinking, Anjil, on this. Can you add something here?
Yeah, so we don't have that system yet in Nepal, but I have heard that government is like trying to work on that. But and if like that comes into practice in Nepal, we are definitely going to try that as well, because at the end of the day, we want to give all the possible measures and to the local communities, so that they can like have easy access to pay for it. Because what we have seen is those water supply schemes who have gone through severe breakdown, they already know why they should have some money in place. So it's just about creating that culture, and then also giving them an easy access. Thank you.
There, I am not muted anymore. We have another question here from Marika. I'd like to stress that ensuring affordability for all user groups is key and a human rights obligation, no matter which pricing scheme is in place. In your management scheme, how is affordability addressed, or is it up to the water user groups?
Okay, thank you. So because Oxfam, we definitely work for the people, like the marginalized groups or the people who are left behind. So affordability and accessibility is always our core issue, right? So I shared one slide where I showed you, like what's the pattern of tariff rates around in those areas. The reason why we were kind of investigating on the tariff rates around those locations was to really understand grow and introduce extensively high tariff.
Anjil, we lost you again for a few seconds. Can you just repeat, please, so we get the whole answer?
Okay, sure. So so let me begin it from let me start from the beginning. So in terms of the affordability, Oxfam keeps it as in its prime focus, whether it's affordability, inclusivity, and then accessibility. That's our core values. So when we are pricing water, we will definitely consider that. Like I shared it in my slide, like we have also looked into the various tariff practices in the area, in those vicinity and the areas where we are working in. The main reason was that once we determine a scientific tariff based on the operation cost, we do not want to introduce a tariff that's too expensive or too high than what's already practiced around in the areas. So we see that, okay, like charging $1 a month or $2 a month is not a very new practice, because these people, the community people, they have seen around that these have been in practice. But that's when we are also aware that there are some parts of community member who may not be able to pay for it. There are some certain percentage of people who may need to, like we might have to completely lay off, like the price for them. We are definitely going to do that as well. So there will definitely be some categorization where, like those people who may not be able to pay for it, there will be some like a layoff in pricing. And even if the tariff is quite a bit high, then government might be subsidizing maybe, let's say, 10% or 20% of the tariff, so that when the amount of money that the user has to pay becomes affordable. And what we have seen from our practice is the tariff of $1 or like $2 a month is not a bit expensive in these areas, because like here and there people are paying for it.
Right, thank you for that. Thank you, Anjil. We also have some more information from Marissa, who has shared a link. So please, everyone in the chat interested, go and have a look. We have a comment or a question from Joe. Hi, Mr. Anjil. In a social communication point of view, I'm just curious if you can share some experience, if any, on the resistance from the population as regards their attitude towards agreeing to tariffs. How did you frame your approach from them to trust you? Thank you very much. From Joe.
Thank you. I think, so what we have done here is, in terms of building culture in place, our stepping way has been to upgrade their water supply system first. We are not really asking them to go in, look, this is the tariff you have to pay. What we are doing is we are first assessing their system. We're upgrading their system to a level which can provide them water, like enough water at their household level. So once doing that, once they see the level of service that we are providing, number one. Number two is introducing, because like user committee is a bit, like they're under huge pressure, because they might be attending their friends' marriages and someone calls from the village that the water system has broken down and they have to come back to the village, and they don't want it because they're doing it for completely voluntarily. So now they also want to have a board model where where a board will take the responsibility of making, taking all these issues and then solving it on time. And in terms of, like Oxfam has been working in these areas for a long period of time. We have been working there for almost now almost 8 years now, and they have seen our work. That has also been a bit of a factor to increase their trust. But at the same time, what we have done is, I think that the major factor has been, upgrading their system to a level that can give them the best service available with the system. That has been a bit of the most important factor. But having said that, if again the system breaks down very frequently in future, we are pretty sure that it might impact in the culture of tariff setting. That's why we are really focusing on ensuring that the system we built is up to par. Thank you.
Thank you. So a reliable system will then make people more willing to pay for the tariffs. I just had also one short question in relation to that. You were talking about the different levels of awareness in different regions or different areas in Nepal. And if you can just tell us a little bit about communication challenges when introducing a market-based approach. How do you communicate? What are the communication strategies when approaching the communities?
Yeah, one of the most important thing in terms of, like market-based approach and tariff is, bringing the private sector in the working area. For example, like let me say, if a fitting, like if there's a problem in a fitting and the user do not see, like value of really, like going to the private sector and buying it, then private sector is not going to come into that village and then sell their product. So one thing is, if they don't have tariff in place, and then they won't have money to buy these facilities, the fittings, and then the private sector will not, like be interested to, like bring their product in the market. So one of the important part in terms of communication when we are talking with the private sector is we show them the value. Like if the user are aware of the need of the system and they know what they need, we provide them, this is the amount of like market that you have in these areas. So on the private sector side, that's how we communicate with them, right? And in terms of community, how we tell to them is that if like if a pump breaks down in the area, and if you have to walk, like a day to go and fix it, that's a bit of a big challenge for them, because they will be out of water for the entire day, right? And they have to bring a technician from a very far area and then again bring like and make it fix, and if it does not fix, they again have to call it. It becomes very expensive. So if you have tariff in place, if you have fund in place, and if like you do approach these private sectors, that they will have the shops in your areas, so then you don't have to go like a whole a 1 day long to just fix your pump. And by discussing on this part, where we show private sector the value of business and we show community the value of services, because like with these change of the whole due to globalization, I think almost everyone in the rural areas use Facebook, TikTok, YouTube. They have been exposed to the entire globalization. I think almost everyone from a village is like from each household is in foreign land, so they do know like importance of like time now, so they want things to be done as quicker as possible. So I think these factors has been very important for us while communicating in terms of market-based approach. And in terms of the border area, in terms of the areas which is like near to India, there has been quite a difficulty, because like they have been through a long time of like getting things on donation. So now they still want everything for free. So like that's where we kind of brought different tools, like if they like if like we gave them different offers, like like if they have to install a pipe system, like they can pay upfront, they can pay an installment basis, a 10 times 10 installment basis, and then if they do so, they will get all the technical services for free. So we brought those different tools and like offer mechanism that also really helped to like build on the
Right.
tariff collection. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very, very much for this very interesting and insightful presentation. Thanks for joining us here on the Communications Initiative. And I will now have next speaker on board is Irene Gai. Here, Irene, how are you? Hello from Nairobi.
Hello, Grel. Nice to be part of this engagement.
Thank you very much for being here. Water sanitation and hygiene strategies, also from Oxfam, but this time from Kenya. And you are going to talk about how a cross-sectorial approach to water can strengthen food security. Welcome.
Yes, thank you. Again, good afternoon to all of you. I will be taking you through Oxfam experiences in Kenya on the value of water for people and development. Of course, looking at how we can leverage water as a natural resource to mitigate some of the climate change dynamics in some of the areas that we are operating in to feed the world. So the work I will profile also brings about a cross-sectoral approach to water and food security, where we are also addressing issues around gender and women empowerment in the process of our engagement. So what I'll present is based on Oxfam in Kenya experiences in arid and semi-arid lands of Kenya. Okay. In terms of my presentation outline, I'll just I'll underscore the importance and the link between water and food security. I'll outline to you the challenges when water systems break, what happens in the practical sense. I'll touch a bit of what rainfed agriculture vis-a-vis a sustainably managed groundwater would look like in the context of the areas we work with. And I will be talking about a case study of one of the villages we've been able to support in Turkana, which is one of the arid and semi-arid lands. It's called Logogo. And then, of course, present to you the approach that Oxfam has taken in terms of management of groundwater in rural and ASAL areas of Kenya, particularly that also links with food security, and give you an insight on the outcome when water system is restored, what happens in a practical sense in a community, but also underscore the price of a broken water system for women and girls, and then give some insights on what matters when you're talking about advocacy around having more resilient wash systems. So when you talk about water and food security, we'd want to underscore that whereas you'll have water strategies and food strategies is in most areas being developed in parallel, I would want to raise at this point that water is actually one of the most vital natural resources for agriculture and other livelihoods, not just as a commodity for drinking for people, but then also in terms of the conservation dynamics around its protection, sustainable use and management represent some of the global challenge that you're having in the 21st century. So my presentation would be anchored more around the dynamics on water management to see how that can then address issues around food security. So in arid and semi-arid lands of Kenya, when you're talking about climate change, then it means so much to the communities we work with. It means that drought has become more frequent and weather patterns are more extreme. And it also means that it has presented conflicts over competing water use in terms of drinking water, but also water for agriculture and water for livestock use. So in our experience, it's not just about water for people, but also looking at the other livelihoods. So then when water systems break or when the source dries up, because then we have surface water in terms of river water that also community access water from, or a groundwater system that has been developed in form of a borehole where people can access water from. So the first picture on my far left is of a dry riverbed. This is an entire river that has literally dried up. And for that community, when it dries up, it means that life becomes even more challenging for the women and girls who are tasked with the mandate of collecting water as part of the social norms in the communities that we work in. So you can see in this picture that when a system is broken or when the river dries, then women have to look for ways to get water that would be serving their families. They would have to literally dig for it like gold on the farthest end of my screen, or walk a long distance, like for these two girls you can see, or literally have to engage in dangerous excursions to get water, like the two women on the second, or on my right hand of the screen. So that is what happens, how it affects local communities in terms of accessibility to water for drinking. But then again, when you're talking about the link now with food security, in the same area where we are working in the same county, that is, the government of Kenya has invested in an irrigation scheme around an area called Takwel. So this scheme predominantly depends on rain-fed agriculture because they tap the, they've done infrastructure around one of the biggest rivers that is perennial in that area. So because of that investment, they have been able to irrigate that specific area of the county. And by extension, that is one of the most productive counties, as you can see that they're even able to access, to have some crops. So where rain-fed agriculture fails, which is a predominant phenomena in the area we're working in, then you're talking about sustainably managed groundwater, because then you would be looking at how best to leverage on groundwater options like boreholes in that specific area to be able to support the local communities, not only as drinking water source, but also to provide food security and sustain other livelihoods. So I will be giving you a quick insight of Logogo, a community village in Turkana, Kenya. It could be any village in the Horn and East and Central Africa, which is predominantly drought driven. So it could even be Uganda, Burundi, Rwanda, Tanzania, or even Somali. So Logogo's story, like many communities we are working in, before Oxfam intervention, we were already seeing that there is inadequate government investments and poor services in basic needs, like even getting water on would be a daily challenge. And like in most of those ASAL areas, of course, getting water for them is like digging for gold. It requires months of excavation before you even strike rich, like the women that I've profiled in this presentation. So the insights we got from the villages, some of them would say, this would be a Gesco, who is a mother of 5, would say that their children are hungry and she has nothing to feed them. The cows are dying, they've even lost their cattle. And this we are talking about in the context of drought, which has become more of a perennial challenge in the area that we have Logogo. So for Jabi, who is also a resident there, said that they'd waited a long time for the rains, but then even when the rain came, it killed the last of their cattle. And for one of the village elders, talked about the price of livestock plummeting. So for them to salvage this, they have to slaughter their goats so that they can at least salvage the meat. But then again, you look at it that 95% of the population is affected by livestock loss. And because of that, now they have to depend on food aid. But then what if we would be able to help the villages in Logogo to have more resilient systems? So not just depending on food aid, but addressing one of the foundational issues that can enable them to meet their food security needs, but also address some of the dynamics they have in that community. So for us, we looked at it as being about fixing some of the broken systems, particularly that provide water supply in those communities. And we've realized that when you provide for a more sustainable mechanism to undertake preventive and also curative maintenance of a water system, then by extension, you're able to not just anticipate some of the problems the local community will have, even in terms of cyclic droughts, but also you're also able to address the needs of small-scale agriculture intervention, as you'll see in this next, in the subsequent slides. So the approach Oxfam took to ensure Logogo and 60 other schemes in that area are able to have sustainable water source that can also provide for their food security was to introduce a market-based model where we are changing the dynamics of how the operation and maintenance of those rural water schemes are organized, managed, and paid for. So in the context of this program, apart from addressing all the dynamics about the rural water community schemes breaking before their lifetime, we are also looking at how best to leverage the existing systems to be able to serve not just people, but also to address fundamental needs like food security. So for Logogo, when we restored their system, this is the kind of outcome that we had. Of course, appreciating that when we were engaging for this, there was another player already in Logogo that had supported with capacity building around this kind of farming model. And Oxfam's engagement was just to ensure that there is more sustainable water supply for these corn gardens to be watered. So the way the corn gardens are done, they can grow a variety of vegetable fruits across the 5 corn areas, and they utilize less water compared to the other gardens. So we had to redesign part of Logogo's water system. One, to be able to supply, to bring water nearer to the village. So the women did not have to go back to the riverbeds to start gold mining for water, if I may use the word, so that they can carry the jerry cans to water this garden. So for this initiative to work, it's required that more sustainable water supply was closer to the village to enable the women not to make many trips to supply water for their own household use and also to tend to the gardens. So as a result of this, you can see that even some of the bumper harvest they had was because of the way the system was restored to be able to enable them supply water for their vegetables, but also have water for drinking, and also ensure that at least for their livestock and herds, we had a cattle track that would enable them to access water. So in our experience, you're saying that if you have a well-managed groundwater system like a borehole, then it has the potential to buffer droughts, look at increasing agricultural production, particularly in water-scarce regions. And Logogo is a perfect example to show that this can be done. It doesn't have to be in a grand scale, but it can be done in a scale where even the local village at least have some basic vegetables to access without waiting for food aid that might take longer to reach them. So when you're talking about a broken water system, again, for us, it's not just about denying communities the opportunity to be able to grow their food, but it's also about exposing women and girls at risk of physical violence. And this is part of the engagement we did through some of the collaborators under REACH program. We were able to establish through their water diary studies that women and girls in that particular county were actually facing physical violence when they would go to fetch water from the riverbeds in Lodwar. So they would have coping mechanisms like to work in groups, or they have to look at other ways to ensure that they are able to access water and avoid incidences of rape or molestation by gangs. So we are saying that more of the same is no longer enough even for the water sector. And for some of you on this call who are communicators, when we are inefficient in our engagements, even in our water and sanitation engagements, then it means you are passing risks to people who cannot take risks. This means women and girls who are more vulnerable, but it also means we are passing on risks to communities who are already vulnerable to the effects of climate change. So then again, we're saying that a number of engagements are focused more on investments, quick fixes. You're talking about a pump is broken, you want to fix that, but you don't look at the holistic, transformative experience that we can give communities. So if we can focus on structural change, instead of this short-term resilience or fixes that a number of agencies take, then we are able to have an impact on a number of goals under the Sustainable Development Goals, not just SDG 6 alone on water and sanitation, but also around zero hunger and also poverty. So as we are talking about fixing a broken system, for us, it's also about women economic empowerment, where we look at the vegetable gardens also as an income opportunity for some of the women to get some money within the villages that they are in, but also looking at other ways to link them with other sector players who have more economic empowerment programs, so that they're able to negotiate better their household water security. And in places where we've done this, we've seen them obtaining storage tanks and also even paying for transport to fetch water where they don't have the facility. So some insights on what matters as I wrap up. One, we are saying that it is important that we continue to drum up support for solutions that step things up, because it's about impact on the ground. So when we look at water sector, it's not just about drinking water alone, but we need to expand the scope of the wash sector, particularly in view of the evolving risk of climate change and adaptation, water scarcity and water stress. And then of course, we should be able to promote some of the models that are leapfrog opportunities where investments are hard to come by. Anjil, before me, a colleague has also talked about one of these innovations that agencies like Oxfam are taking. And of course, you're saying that these are the kind of investments that we should be also profiling, particularly not just to look at how to build more water facilities, but also to address how do we maintain existing water infrastructure to be able to address some of the needs the community have, including around food security. Thank you. So in your own capacity, you can make a difference to improve the situation.
Thank you very much, Irene. Our first question here is from Mike. Thank you so much for sharing the example of the cone gardens. Never seen those before. Is it something that's been developed in Kenya?
Okay, thank you for that question. So for cone gardens, this is an innovation by an organization called Pan-Africa. Kenya is one of the countries they are engaging in, but they're also doing the same in a number of African countries. So you can look them up and you'll be able to interact with this kind of innovation. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you very much from Mike. I wanted to ask Irene, we've all read a lot about the very severe drought that is at the moment plaguing parts of Africa's Horn and parts of northern Kenya. Can these kind of schemes help alleviate some of the, well, a crisis like the drought and a hunger crisis? What do you think? How does it look at the moment up there?
Okay, thank you, Grel. Actually, the model that we have where we have a pre-agreement with the private sector operator has really worked well, because for the 60 schemes that we already enrolled in the bundled service agreement, we were able to undertake preventive maintenance to around 35. And by extension of that, we were able to divert some of the more difficult crises of systems breaking. For the 35, you realize that some of them were along the migratory corridors for pastoralists. So it means there was more influx of other villagers coming into their village and overloading the system. So because you are able to do preventive maintenance in advance, you are able to keep the taps running and avert crises that would have been worse in those 35 villages. And then in addition to that, for about 55 schemes out of the 60, we realized that a number of them also needed about support to replace some parts that were already broken down because of the drought. And we were able to engage and ensure that those communities continue to get water. So because of that, the county government was able to already free some resources which otherwise they would have used to provide for tracked water, which is more expensive with that community, also because of the distances of water tracking that you'd have to cover. So some of the things that we did in our engagement are the kind of models I've talked about in Logogo, where we had to address also the needs of the pastoralists so that their livelihoods in form of livestock is also not impacted by not having access to water. So we provided for cattle tra, and we're able to channel the water to be able to provide for that cattle tra. We also provided for an outlet for their vegetable gardens to enable the women also to grow food, because we realized that cash transfer alone is not having an impact. If already the village is almost 200 kilometers from the nearest town, they don't have a food supply around there. So even if they get money, they have to wait for the lorries that do trips once a week to finally get to their village before they can buy that food, sorry. So if they grow their own, even as they take the vegetables, then they're able to actually move to the next center, not even get supplies, because now they'll have enough strength to move on to look for other supplies. Thank you.
Right, thank you. That's very interesting. Thank you very much. And Charles says, Irene, have you heard of the movement that declares a minimum of 2 gallons of clean water as a human right? And I guess, yeah, have you heard about that, Irene? And what do you think about that in that case?
Which agreement, sorry?
Sorry, I must unmute.
Can I explain?
Yes, you can, Charles. Go ahead.
Yes, it's a human rights movement that declares that 2 gallons of clean water per person per day is a human right. Also 2,000 nutritional calories and 200 cubic feet of shelter. But I just wanted to mention that to you there. And I didn't hear what country you're active in, but there's a good chance we're active there with our small pilot project. So 2 gallons of clean water. We're using getting rid of the bacteria that you may be familiar with, the nanotechnology. Sawyer makes a filter and Vivo Blue make a filter. That 50 people are sharing a filter at these clinics and schools that we're active in. And the filter installed with the parts and material and distribution can be done for $50 a filter. And 50 people are sharing that filter at collection points. So I just wanted to mention that. It's called Suki 222, SUKHI 222. I'll put it in the chat. And thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Yes, put it in the chat, please. And we have one question more here from Muganuzi. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. Is there organized some capacity building by that organization in Logogo that others organizations should benefit from? Any capacity building there by the organization? I guess it's your organization, Oxfam, in Logogo?
Yes, currently Logogo is still part of the 60 schemes that we are supporting under this operation and maintenance contract with the private sector. Particularly for water, Oxfam is directly supporting to ensure the system is maintained for the coming period. For the agriculture bits, our engagement has been to the point where we ensure that there is constant supply for their kitchen gardens. Though they have been getting support from Pan-Africa, the organization I talked about, and Pan-Africa is the one that engages in terms of the local capacity building for the women and the men in that village. But then we say that should there be other agencies as well who would be interested in doing other components, then they are welcome to collaborate with the communities in those specific areas in Turkana. And yes, Gurel, yes, there's a 7.5 liter minimum. So when you're operating in an emergency context, we have also what you're calling the sphere standards. So that is the bare minimum for an emergency context. But at Oxfam, we always try as much as possible to address all the needs of the community, with the priority being given to drinking water. But then we've realized that if we don't address water also for other uses, like for livestock, then you compromise the drinking water infrastructure that you have, because the pastoralists, in some of the communities, we've even seen them destroying water infrastructure when they don't have a facility for the animals to drink. So in our experience, as you address the human right need to water, also addressing the livelihood dynamic is as key, particularly if we are talking about the ASOL areas that we're operating in. Thank you.
No, I thought unmuted myself. Very important to keep in mind. Absolutely. We have some comments from Mike. We do need to get on to the next speaker. Just quick yes or no, maybe Irene. Micah says WHO suggests that more like around 50 to 100 liters per day are required to cover drinking water and personal hygienes, meaning that the 2 gallons mentioned, the 8 liters would be too little from a human rights perspective, isn't it? Very, very, very quickly, Irene, because we need to move on to the next speaker.
Yeah, it's true that it would be very little, but then like I've shared, the context might be different. In an emergency situation, you look at now saving lives first. So you look at water for drinking as the priority. That is why you have the 7.5 to address drinking, but also basic hygiene needs, where you also have other alternatives to address hygiene, like the use of ash, for example, to sanitize the hands. So there are protocols informing emergency context, and then there are protocols informing a normal general scenario where you're talking about also larger populations at hand. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Irene. Thank you everyone for interesting contributions, questions, and input in the chat. It's really nice to see that so many people are engaged in our themes and our topics. Thanks, Irene, for coming. We are now going to welcome our next speaker in the program, Anabela Lemos. We are moving a little bit further south on the continent to Mozambique and Justicia Ambiental. There we are, Anabela, hello. Justicia Ambiental being members of Friends of the Earth in Mozambique. Anabela Lemos is the first climate activist to receive the Per Anger Prize. And for those of you who don't know about the Per Anger Prize, it's a Swedish prize honoring a member of Ambassador Per Anger and awarded to individuals or groups in recognition of their humanitarian work and initiatives in the name of democracy. And this is, as I said, the first time it's awarded to a climate activist. And me and Anabela are going to talk about climate justice. First of all, Anabela, tell me just a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you got involved in environmental work.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the invitation and to be here. I'm always an environmentalist at heart, and my life always been looking to and protect and maintain environmental issues. But as the world changed from when I was young to now, environmental and social issues become part and together. You cannot do one without doing to another one. And I started defending the rights of communities. I started protecting and trying to defend the environmental. And then we start in Mozambique because we only became independent in 1975. So the first 30 years of independence was very much by a socialist communist system. No NGO exists other than 8 NGOs. So in 98, when this project came around of burning pesticides that were given and not used, given from the north to the south, but not used, to kill factory, a cement factory, we raise our voice, and you are the first movement that raised our voice against a government project and a Danida from Denmark project. We fight for 2 years, and we ended up winning. We all voluntaries. We work because we live nearby the place, and we thought the pollution already by the cement kiln already bad enough to make it worse by burning pesticides, and you know about the dioxins and all the impacts on health. So after that, we realized that there's many problems rising in Mozambique because Mozambique suddenly become democratic and many foreign investments who no respect for environmental, ever for the people. So we decided to carry on fighting. So since 98, we've been protecting the environment and protecting the people, their rights, their land, and above everything, it's centered on a climate crisis that we live today. Everything is linked, and our work is based on that.
Right, right. Thank you. Being an environmental defender in Mozambique, you and your colleagues play a quite high stakes game. There's been threats, subjected to burglary, beatings, other kinds of abuse. What drives you to continue your activism despite the dangers? I mean, it is dangerous to be a climate activist.
Yes, not only in Mozambique, but many other places in the world. But when we believe in something, and then you see how unjust this system is, you cannot shut up. We just need to carry on and try to minimize the risks that you have. And it's like something that's on you. You know, I am an activist, and I don't know how I cannot do so or raise my voice or work for things to change when I think something is wrong. And I think it's a personality. I think many of us activists are like that, because we do believe that change can happen, and the risks we take, we need to be together, support each other, and carry on working, because if we stop, it will be much worse for many people. Plus, the people that live in a rural area, they are so dependent on natural resources, and they've been grabbed and taken from them. So someone needs to be a voice of the ones that don't have the voice. And natural nature, a tree doesn't have a voice, a river doesn't have a voice. So we have to give the voice to that.
To them, yes, thank you.
Sorry, English.
No, that's very fine. I think it's fascinating to hear you. And I mean, when I introduced you, I also mentioned climate justice. We're going to talk about climate justice. And sometimes I have this feeling that climate justice has almost become like a buzzword. People talk about it, we need to fight for climate justice. But in your definition, how would you define climate justice?
I'm going to start by saying that we're living in an age that are confronted with multiple crises, and climate justice is deeply linked to so many crises as today the world is facing: food, energy, water, inequality, biodiversity, that increase intensity of natural disasters such as cyclones, floods, and drought. So climate justice starts by recognizing that the climate crisis is a social and political problem, as well as an environmental one. That's the point, the base of climate justice. And that the responsibility of the crisis falls more in some countries than others, most of them from the global north. And for us to achieve climate justice, we need to phase out all fossil fuels, ban all new possible exploration of coal, gas, and oil, and transform, that's the basic, transform our energy system towards a clean, renewable, decentralized, people-based, and just system that upholds energy as a right to all, and to address the burden that some countries do have very low responsibility for this crisis, but they are the ones more affected. So the justice of this comes from the difference, and above everything, we all as women have the right of energy, of water, and food, because everything links to climate crisis. The crisis today is taking water from people, is taking their natural resources, their life depends on that. So that's why we say it's should be just, not just fighting the climate crisis, but must be just and must be a right for everyone. And the decisions needs to come from bottom up, not the citizens impose, and a few elite that do have access to energy. As you know, the climate, it's a bigger problem of climate, it's a fossil fuels, use and abuse. So fossil fuels is energy. So we need to find systems of energy that allows everyone to have energy as a right. So
right.
it's all context. Maybe I'm a bit confused with my English.
No. Yeah, I mean, basically, it's all linked, and it needs to be just for everyone. We are a group of, or you're speaking in front of a group of communicators and journalists that are participating in this workshop. And what would your suggestions be for this group of professional communicators to help the fight for climate justice?
I think the power of stories, narratives, and ideas have always a huge power and influence on the directions that people have taken. So the journalists are one of the most important on this regards. By writing about the actual crisis, the real solutions, and the many found solutions that corporations are bringing over and over again to show examples of the actual situation, it is critical that journalists continue to explore, learn, and connect with movements and activists so they can spread our information and our reality. Warm, inspire people, and hopeful get more and more on the patch of system change. We cannot only have solutions, and we can only fight this climate crisis and have a future of this planet if you realize that many things on this system needs to change. I don't know if I'm clear, but
right. And for gathering these stories and gathering stories on climate injustice and the climate crisis, water crisis, what would you say in your work as well are the most challenging? Is it information gathering? Is it source finding? What do you find is the most challenging in your line of work there?
It's the cooperation as the how much media and support do fossil fuels company do have compared to the movements and the people that are on the ground fighting. So journalists needs to start looking and seeing how people are impacted by this use and abuse of fossil fuels, and the solutions are there, and we need to find them. So gather live histories of the people in the ground, how difficult they have to access to water, how difficult they have living without energy, how difficult it is to have their land grabbed by corporations. They're exploring the fossil fuels and they don't have any benefit and living nearby. They get the pollution, they get water problems, they don't have land, and they suffer. So those stories needs to be up in all over the world for people to realize what's going on. And then, of course, what solutions there is. There is solutions, and we know.
Right. You were mentioning before the climate change, and the climate change is visible in Mozambique today already. Can you give some examples in why do we see climate change happening in Mozambique today?
Yes, Mozambique, it's one of the countries that's in all IPC reports most affected by this climate crisis. And we always have floods and droughts, but now the intensity and the number of times we do have, it's much more intense and many more times. Just an example, we had 2 cyclones in 2009. We had two already this year, but in 2009, we had a huge cyclone, Idai. And then after 1 month, we have Kenneth. That causes 1.85 million of people affected. Over 600 people died. Over 1,700 were injured. A loss of 400 houses and much more. I'm not talking about the millions of dollars they were needed to support. Of course, the aid comes from outside, but this impact is still feeling today. So, and this, it's going to get worse and worse. And the contradiction we have here, and you know that droughts are what we call the silent killer because we are in constant areas of drought, but they're not much speaking. if you don't go, if you don't see, and people are surviving with the minimal, and many times not surviving, but that doesn't come much on the news. And the contradiction of this, and for me, I think it's a bit sad, it's that we have all those impacts, we know about the crisis, and then Mozambique decided to follow the path of fossil fuels. First of coal, now is gas. And one thing that's connecting all this, it's the need of the north of the gas, because most of the gas is going to be exported. We're going to have the land is being grabbing, the access to the sea, the fishermen is being gone, they can't fish. They are giving houses without very conditions to survive. There's no land for them to grow their crops. There's no sea for them to fish. And then we have a northern company, that's Total and others, to explore the gas, pollute everything, destroying our ecosystem, because the gas is going to be on the sea where dolphins and whales and all those type of sea animals live. And they're going to export to Europe to maintain the system of the north.
Right, and sorry, the gas you're talking about is the gas exploration happening in Cabo Delgado, northern Mozambique, right?
Yes.
Where mainly French interests at the moment are involved, trying to explore the gas there. But and if we know these consequences, and we know the consequences of climate change, we know there are solutions to finding other sources, what can we do to put, in your opinion, what can we do to put more pressure on decision makers to actually take action? Because we know all these things.
I think one of the things we can is solidarity between North and South. There's a very big movement on fighting climate justice and demanding the changes that needs to be done, but it takes time. And I think, at least in Mozambique and many African countries, our voice, it's ignored, and when it's not ignored, we have threats and attacks. So the North has a much bigger possibility to influence their leaders, because they are democratic, what do you call, systems that leaders now, if they not follow what they promise, or if at least they don't follow what the people want, there'll be changes. And in our country, that's very difficult to see changes on a political system. And also the North needs to realize that the system needs to change of consuming and to find ways to minimize the impacts. I know that we're living in a climate that's very cold sometimes in some places, and in others it's too hot. We need to have support of air conditions, or in the north with heaters and things like that. But there is other systems. There is other renewable systems, more clean, and they can do the same. And we need to realize that we are not going to adapt of anything over 1.5 degrees. Adaptations is only possible above that. So if you reach 1.5 and we go over, and all the science says that, is not going to be adaptation, at least on a global south. Many people are going to die. And my question, and Jacques questions, and many of us in the movement, it's how many people are going to die for the fossil fuel companies carry on exploring, and the governments didn't take a decision to stop and phase out. It was very clear, the last IPC report, and the Secretary of the United Nations was clear, he even called criminals to the corporation governments inactivity to decide.
And if you think that it takes a lot of more voices from the north and more pressure on the northern governments, what do you think about stronger legislations? I mean, we have seen a few examples of some court cases happening in Europe where corporates have actually been punished judged. Do we need stronger international legislations to overcome this crisis?
Yes, we have good laws in Mozambique, some of them, but not implementation, at least in Mozambique. It's nearly null. But in the north, yes, we have the UK case. They questioned the finance from to the Mozambique gas, and we need much more. Also, in many legislations on the north and some on the south, in the constitution, there's the right of a future. So if you don't deal with the climate crisis, you're not giving that right to the future generations. So there's a case in the United Nations, US, that I think a group of young people took the government to court to demand their rights of living. And I think there's another country, I'm not sure which one is, but the young people, the young generation rising up and demanding their right to live in a healthy and safe world. And I think that's the beginning of change.
That's the beginning, yes.
And the Shell case also, there's many cases going around and we need to carry on. In the north, because the legislation is strong in the north, take the companies to court, take governments to court for our right of living.
There was, if I remember correctly, there was recently a big court case that was concluded where Shell is now having to pay Nigeria for all the oil spills and the climate disaster that Shell caused in the delta there. Do any of you by the participants amongst the participants, do you have any questions for Anabela? Feel free to type them in the chat and I will convey them to her. We have a few more minutes with Anabela before we move on to our next speaker. But if you have any questions for her, just type them in the chat. And you mentioned, Anabela, the importance of global networks and South joining hands with the North. That's also very interesting and I think very important. Now, Marissa writes, but relations among communicators or speakers and NGOs and journalist investigations helps to draw public attention about this issue. That is why data is so important. Yes, of course, information and correct data, as we were talking about last week, countering a lot of the misinformation and disinformation. Is that the problem that you've encountered, Anabela, with disinformation, misinformation, miscrediting of your own organization?
Yes, because we only talk with facts, and anything related to communities, we do bring their concerns and what happened to them. In Cabo Delgado, due to the war, we've been having a lot of problems because Mozambique is closing our space, is shrinking more and more space. And now they have had a new law that we cannot talk about the terrorism in the north because the information that comes out, as you know, Cabo Delgado is in war today with the insurgency because we believe it's centered on a gas. It happened in Nigeria, it's happening in Mozambique, and it's happening in other African countries. And people are dying. And then because of this war and because of the gas that's so important for so many, this is becoming a very big place of conflict in the north of Mozambique. And so information that comes out start being monitoring. And we're going to have problems, not only us, but every journalists are very worried because there's very cases of women's rights violation by the military, even rapes that comes to light, and the things are just buffer up and no one wants to talk. And comes out and government doesn't answer, ignores. And with this new law, they can just say it's a lie and put someone in prison for 90 days if they say something that is true and is a fact, but for them it's not. So will be more difficult than it is now to bring evidence to, we do bring, but I'm seeing ahead of us more problems with this. And I think this is when international journalists could help with the information and spread that information. Even if, like many times our government, when international organizations like Amnesty International and human rights and all that have asked about some cases that were in a video and very clear what happened, governments just states not the military, and of course there no one can interfere with their sovereignty, or you call, and stops the solution of violent crimes.
So information, correct data, anything to counter misinformation and miscreditation. We have a water question for you from Muganuzi. Anabela, what do you think Africa should do to provide clean water, whereby even governments is highly delaying the funding due to corruption? And corruption is of course another very difficult and contentious issue.
Yes, Mozambique is high on corruption, and I think water is a human right. You can't live without water, and most of our rural people depend on rivers for their survival. And there's a big fight in Africa between civil society and World Bank and the government, because they want to privatize the water. And it's happening in many countries, and in Mozambique, it's another thing that we start fighting. And what needs to be demanding, it is a right for every human being. And the right should be the first thing to do. And I think we should start taking a case to court when people do not have that access to water as a right. And I think this needs to be another example of cases to go to court because of water. And if we don't solve this crisis we live today, in the future, probably we're going to have wars because of water. Today is because fossil fuels, tomorrow probably going to be for water. So we need to demand, and I think Africa, it's in a very bad situation in regards of water. As a continent, we're not a continent that has much water, sweet water to drink, sort of. And I think we need to start prioritize the use of water. Like an example, you're going to build a dam. Why should we build a dam when it's much more important to give water to the people? Energy we can get. We can add other sources of energy, solar, wind, and many others. That doesn't need to be taken from our right of water to use the rivers and whatever systems we can have to get the water.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we will need to carry on in the program. Thank you very much for joining us, Anabela. I think very important to speak about justice when it comes to climate and water, and all the best of luck with your continuous work in Mozambique. Thanks a lot for being here at the Communications Initiative of World Water Week.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. We now have one more speaker for today, and we are welcoming Kusum Athukorala, Chair of NetWwater Sri Lanka. Thank you very much for being here.
I'm okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. For everyone to know, me and Kusum have been talking about internet connections previously today. It's very difficult in Sri Lanka at the moment. We are grateful that you are connected and that you can take part of the program. Kusum is here to talk about women, water, and building resilience. And please, Kusum, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, and thank you all of you, because journalists and communicators deal with the ideas, taking the ideas to society, taking the ideas to community, to power blocks, to decision makers. And in my first life, I used to do language and literature, and this is something that is very important for me, because I'm coming from university background. I used to teach university. And always I think, what is it that I do as a researcher? How is it going to affect communities, people, and how is it going to be making something better in the world of water and women? And I still come with this problem. I am still coming with these questions. But I do think that communication for me is really important, because especially when it is communications related to gender and water. Gender is very much an activity which is having different connotations, different meanings in different worlds, and it is also has different words. You know, sometimes we find that the word about gender, as in my language, there is no word for gender. We have only a word for sex. So when we had to work on gender, we really had to make this jaw-breaking, long construct. And it is very much the same in very many of the Asian countries. Because when we talked about gender, I think it starts a lot with the Beijing, with the impetus comes from Beijing. And then we had programs which were WID and WAD, women in development, women and development, and then we come to gender. Now in this process, the development sector has also gone in different ways with its response to gender. And this has had two issues, two consequences. One is economic, the other one is social. Both these are important for us right now in where we are in 2022, because we are coming from a long period where gender or women's issues or women's empowerment was recognized and encouraged. But how it could have been supported more or supported better is a moot question. So when you talk of key challenges and findings to achieve gender equality in the domain, this is kind of, I have been speaking ad nauseum. There is only one word. It is money, money, money. You know, money, 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 always handy. It's a rich man's world. And very often what we have is that we have good ideas. As Anabela said, we have good laws. We could even have policies. But how do you implement this? How do you make this happen? It always takes it always takes much more than is available to us as gender activists, as gender researchers, and women's empowerment, women's empowerment activists, and the money is always lost. So the inability of the decision makers to fund the community level support, maybe the provincial level support, which is needed to buttress these women's empowerment related activities, is a problem. It's an ongoing problem. It continues to be a problem. So are we looking at the key challenges of the women as victims of climate change? You know, the victims, I always say women are the foot soldiers of climate change. They are never the generals, because they don't go up, you know, in the pecking order to be generals. But if we can think of some way that these people are also the people who would make a change. If we want to have climate resilience, we have to build resilience at ground level, at community level. If we want to have people standing up, taking charge of their own lives, we need to support them at that ground level. If we want men and women and youth especially to make the change in this horrendous situation which has led us to this climate crisis, we have to help them. But that support calls for money. The former speaker talked about, I think there was a question about data. Data is very important because, you know, I mean, if you come in as a journalist, if you don't have data, you'll say, I can't spend that much of time looking for data. I have to write my story. But data costs money enormously. Because if is it a matter of number crunching from the maybe the census Department of Census and Statistics, or is it going down to community level and seeing why is it that this particular policy is not working at ground level? Why is it this policy related to water not happening because we don't have the correct gender sensitive approach. So these are the issues which come to my mind, and these are the issues which are for us at this point in time, when we are about 7 years more to 2030 in this decisive decade. We are still talking about women's organizations, women's groups, women at the ground level getting a minuscule amount of global funding. And that has not changed. I'm not sure now, of course, there are activities on which we do not have a gendered approach to data, and therefore we don't know how much goes into men and women. But that again is because of our gender blind, our gender neutral approach. And that we have so many years after Beijing, so many years after Dublin Rio, so many years after the SDGs, we are still living with this. We are letting it happen. And we are saying, what can we do for women? First, we have to have the data even to understand what is it that women can do, what they want to do, what they cannot do. And that is not there. So the building resilience in communities, the two words that come to my mind is citizen science and community engagement. Both costs money. And this citizen science is important because when we have a situation where we maybe have a crisis, maybe as was talked about in the Mozambique case, you know, where you have a problem of water in the rivers and maybe there's pollution. There are situations where the women as professionals can go in as engineers, as chemists, but there are also a plethora of knowledge in the communities. How women in communities understand water quality, how they deal with the problem of water quality, how they may, use water quality from different sources according to according to their knowledge, how they even use indigenous methods in water purification. So all this is not really on our agenda because we go from a very Western science related approach and we say, okay, this is how you do water quality. This is how you measure water quality. But can we give this, translate this activity into something which is an interactive exchange of knowledge? I always say, and when we started NetWwater, we said, we are going to learn from the community as much as we teach the community. It is a two-way process. And this we have always seen that the strongest advocates for us, for what we do, comes from the community women. Then again, if we are talking about resilience building in communities, I think that what we need to do is look at the keywords. Who are the actors in resilience building? Is it just a group of people who are funded by a donor organization who goes and has a 1 hour lecture, 2 hour lecture and tells people this is how things should happen? Is it the time? You know, more and more I have seen our programs falling apart because we went at the wrong time. We can't go and talk with women at the time they have to be cooking or that they are working in the fields. We need to adjust our timetable to fit in with their timetable. The other is the venue. If we have a program for women, for instance, in Asia, very often we have very conservative societies. If we have men and women together in the first program, we would probably find that the women are very silent. And then somebody would come, maybe a donor would come and say, oh, these women are very silent. They didn't say anything. They are not interested. It is not that they are not interested, but it is the culture that they do not get up and speak. So we have to understand this. So when we want to do something where we feel that this barrier is possible, what we would do is have a program for men and women separately and then bring them together. And then the other one is the, what shall I say, the modes of remuneration. We as researchers, we as professionals, we are paid for our time. But when we take time from a community group or community women, how do we pay them? Do we say, oh yes, we gave them a lot of information? Or is there some other way? I'm not saying that, we pay them to come, but there must be some way in which we can compensate for their loss of time, because for them, their time is very valuable. These women in communities may be working 16 to 18 hours. So we need to look at all these factors when we are building resilience in a community. And again, just being the supportive donors, I'm sort of, what shall I say, I'm happy that within the years that I have been working on in gender and water from the 90s onwards, we have seen increased interest of donors in supporting women's empowerment, in supporting gendered activities. But I think we need to go a little bit better. Sometimes I even think, was it a mistake to have a separate SDG for gender? Or should we have focused more and put all our strength into making sure that every one of the SDGs had some kind of a something which would make it gender, that we would build gender equity into it. Is this what we should have done? Because gender is in every one of these SDGs. So are we going to say, look, we are going to do education and look at education without saying yes, we are going to look at education in as much it affects half of humanity, we may have to do slightly different ways of working our programs. So the other one is, after sitting from Beijing to Dublin Rio to the SDGs, to MDGs, to the SDGs, I am slightly worried that have we as gender activists, as gender communicators, have we failed to take the urgency of the message to the donors? Has we made it yet another silo where we are trying to say, okay, we do things in the gender, on a gender platform? Have we not taken it to the main line, to the mainstream? Have we failed to try and work with political decision makers at every level, at global level? If you look at, if I look back, the Hague Forum, one of the key factors which were emphasized is accessing political decision makers. And these political decision makers need to be not lectured to, but we have to engage in a very what shall I say, a heartfelt discourse. Give some of the what we have learned from the field, from the community, or bring them face to face with community leaders who can talk about the importance of building resilience at community level. So the other one is, can we also look not only at the message, but look at the medium? Very often, doing a lecture at for maybe it works for women water professionals, it will work for university students, but when it comes to community, it may not be the best medium. So can we use other media as well, using video clips, again money, again that comes in, to give our message. We are 7 years away from 2030. This is the decisive decade. And we are still struggling how to look at half of humanity in everything that we do in operationalizing the SDGs. Is this something that we thought would be? Probably not. But the last year, and especially this year, things are going to get worse for us because the funding is going into defense. The funding is going into, it already has, we are lost quite a bit because we are losing food security. We don't know where the fertilizer comes from. And in many countries, not only in our country, we would think that looking at water has to be rewired in view of all these crises. We can't go according to the same old tune. We need to quickly change the way that we work and operationalize. For me, the best people to take this message forward are the journalists and the communicators. If we can engage with them and see how they can use their skills to operationalize our vision, our work, our issues, our challenges, our tragedies. I think this is what I would like to see in working with journalists and communicators. I'd like to have questions if we have any.
There are some questions already. I start with Sarfraz, saying that journalists in Pakistan are facing a lot of problems while getting data from development organizations, government sectors, and comments from experts on climate change and water, etc. Please, Kusum, can you share your experience on how we can tackle this situation and what are the practices going on in Sri Lanka?
Actually, something that I did quite successfully, I would say, is having sessions for media personnel, taking them on media surveys. Now, two things which sort of stick in my mind is that one is I've done quite a bit of work on river sand mining, and there we took about 35, everybody from every media house in Sri Lanka on a study of a river damaged by sand mining, and that gave us like a blitz of media related, whether it was print media, visual media on sand mining. It helped to put sand mining on the spot. It helped the media people to get even the president to comment on the sand mining. And it did help because it also brought, help people to give a platform for their voices. People could understand what is happening when a river is mined and the level goes down. The women are the first victims because the wells in the water run dry. So those little tragedies, the human tragedies, the absolute difficulty of spending so much of your life getting water from 5 kilometers away when the river is just next to you, those are the things that a media person could, really highlight. And the second one is that media tours that we undertook after the worst landslide in the history of Sri Lanka. Again, the media people were able to highlight the factor that this wasn't, it wasn't a natural disaster. There was also a man-made element in it because when we had 5 days of 100 millimeters of rain come down in that particular landslide area, what lots of people forgot was that there had also been massive deforestation before that. So the media people managed to get it together. I think that you need to get onto the field and get onto the field if possible with decision makers.
And if you struggle to get data and information, if NGOs, if government sectors just denies you, do you have any tips and tricks of how to get around that?
Well, I think every good journalist has his informants, I think this is where you will always find someone who wants to do it, who thinks that this information should go. And then it helps you go beyond the census and statistics. And it's always useful if you can, write, do little case studies or work with someone who does case studies as a researcher and bring that together.
Bring it together. Thank you. I'm going to ask if you want to have a go at Claudia's question here. I'll read it out to you. How does the war in Ukraine influence the Paris Agreement and public policies to mitigate the increase in temperature and pollution of the environment? Do you have any thoughts or feelings about that you want to share?
No, I don't think I can share that.
No.
Because believe me, as you have a war in Ukraine, if you look at our current situation, we have a different kind of war in Sri Lanka, which is taking a lot of our energies. But the war in Ukraine is going to, impact on us because of the food security.
Yes, of course. Yeah. We will pass that on, or we keep that question for maybe later on in the sessions. Now we have here from Charles. Are there universities that are collaborating and sharing data to address climate change and cross-disciplinary? Do you have any tips and ideas? Otherwise, I think
we have lots of universities in South Asia, in Southeast, that I know, Southeast Asia, who are working on climate change. But I think this is where I also think that if you are looking at civil society and gender activists, water activists, they need to link up with the universities. The universities need them as much as they need the universities, because they are, again, the universities usually have a little bit of funding, and the civil society activists would know where to go. So it's a win-win situation if they team up.
Thank you. Marissa has also shared, have a look in the chat, everyone. Marissa has shared some information and group of experts and interested people on water and gender. Network is working by sharing experiences to start with, and we all work at different levels and sectors in our regions. So please have a look at that for those of you who are interested. Some people are saying goodbye. I have a question from Africa here as well. Muganuzi, Kusum, I have a question for you. How does gender and climate change affect families when it comes to accessing clean water?
Well, if you look at many areas which would have had what we call successors in the water sector, community water supply projects, all of them are now affected by climate change and the droughts, which are becoming more and more frequent and more longer. So I think that I really don't know anything very much about Africa, but I believe this is a situation which is all over the world.
Yeah, thank you. There are some more Africa-specific questions, but unfortunately, then I think we will just have to let them go a bit. You said when we spoke earlier, Kusum, that basically we do have all the knowledge we need about water and how to get water, clean water for everyone and water equity. But why? What are the biggest challenges to get results, to get this to happen? I mean, if we have the knowledge, we know how to do it. Is it just the money that stops us from bringing clean water to everyone, or what are the biggest challenges?
I think it could be several possibilities, not all in the same situation. It could be corruption, because the corruption in the water sector could be a big block for getting clean water to communities. It also could be, it could even be a mindset and attitude, because if very often if you would find somebody who's a professional, I mean, that professional would be very happy engaging with other professionals, but not so much with people who would be considered less educated. So for us in NetWwater, we think that, we learn as much from the community as they learn from us. So that is also, so mindset, attitude, and of course, the overarching issue of corruption, which is affecting many countries, are the possible roadblocks.
Thank you. We have, yes, just Cecilia has also shared some useful information for everyone in the chat. Thank you very much for that, Cecilia. And Charles says, Kusum, are the SDGs the best method of managing the data and directing action and funding, you think?
No, for me, the SDGs work in clusters. That if I look at my little handy guide to the SDGs, I would say that if you look at 5 and 6 come together, but so does number 1, no poverty, it's 0 hunger, good health. So, this is a whole cluster of SDGs that we are looking at. So if we keep on saying, look, I'm funding only SDG 6 or 11, that may not be the most appropriate way of, organizing an activity. Because, we to a certain extent, this is useful, but it is also puts you in silos.
Yes, and maybe we come back to your own question or the question you brought up when it comes to gender and the SDGs. Every one of the SDGs should have been on gender or have had gender incorporated in the goal. Is it so?
Yeah, it is, for me, it is very difficult that we keep on putting this into little boxes, because, it's such an integrated experience. How can you talk about food security without talking about women or water or climate or poverty?
Yeah, that's true. Thank you. Thank you very much, Kusum. If there's no more questions here in the chat, I think we'll leave it at that. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. I'm glad that connection holds.
I think we both struck lucky. Thanks.
Yes, I think we struck lucky.
For inviting me.
Thank you very much.